Science Fiction Fantasy Network. I'm talking to Andrew Smith. He is a writer, probably best known for his work on Doctor Who. You wrote the serial Full Circle, and now you're working for Big Finish. What's the transition been like, writing for screen to writing for audio? Had you written audio before you started working with Big Finish?
Yeah, I had. I mean, my career's been in two halves, separated by about 30 years, because I wrote for television back at the beginning of the 80s, Doctor Who, but also plays for television and a lot of comedy work on shows like Not the 9 O'Clock News, Kick Up the 80s. And yeah, I had worked in audio. I'd written a radio play for BBC Radio back in 82 or 83, and also quite a lot of radio comedy. So I'd done it before, but yeah, there had been this gap, because I went in, I became a police officer, did that for 30 years, and about 5 or 6 years ago, Big Finish asked if I'd like to write for them, and I did a couple of things, and I've now written about 20 or, well, I think I'm they're not all released, but I think I've now written over 25 dramas for Big Finish, both Doctor Who and other titles like Blake, Seven and Survivors.
How have you changed as a writer? Has your process changed, or do you feel you've changed in any other way?
I've got 30 years more life experience behind me, that's the thing, and quite a bit of experience. So, in the police service, I saw all levels of life and some things that people generally don't see. A lot of human drama in that time, high-end, high-budget drama, and some of the things that I dealt with as well. Yeah, and I'm a parent. So I've got two kids. I've got a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter, and and that obviously changes you, and that's reflected in some of the writing that I do as well.
When you're writing for something like Doctor Who, there are a lot of established characters within it, and you also create your own characters. How do you tread the line between being a bit more flexible with your own characters versus trying to stick to something with other people's characters?
The nice thing with Doctor Who from a writer's point of view is there aren't that many regular characters. Unless you're doing something like, say, a third Doctor unit story, you've usually got the Doctor and companion, or Doctor and a couple of companions, sometimes a Doctor and three companions. So there's a lot of scope in most of what I write for an awful lot of original characters within what is, again, usually a pretty original story, unless you're doing a sequel to something that's been on TV or a previous Big Finish story. One thing always to be careful of, as a writer, you tend to favour your own characters, but you've got to remember that this is a series. As with any series, you've got your lead actors, your lead characters. So principally for us, it's the Doctor and companion in Doctor Who terms, and they always have to be at the forefront. And for me, at least, the Doctor always has to be driving things, and the companion has to make their own proactive contribution to the story, and not just be there to say, "What's going on, Doctor?" or just meekly following. They both have to drive the story. At the same time, that leaves you plenty of scope to create your own original and hopefully interesting characters, and have them very much influence things as well.
What's your process when you're creating a character of your own? Do you start with the story requires this kind of character, or do you create a character and build the story around them?
I suppose another way of saying that is, where does a story start? And sometimes it starts with a situation. Sometimes it starts with a theme, say about parenthood perhaps, and I wrote a main range title called The Brood of Eris, which is very much about parenthood, really, explored in a number of different ways. And I've just storylined something actually that I've delivered to Big Finish at 1 o'clock this morning, actually, that started with a character that I had in mind, which, although for me that's fairly unusual, but I just had this idea of this particularly strong character that I wanted to put in a story, and the pitch was really less of a situation and more about this character that I created, and a kind of an environment that I placed him in for the purposes of the pitch to Big Finish. Said, "Do you want a story like that with this character in this kind of situation?" And they said yes, and now the storyline's gone down very well. But often it will just be the situation at the start of the story will be the thing that takes me in, and then my way to develop that is I'll do a sequence of like bullet points to myself of things that I want to put in the story. I often will do a list of questions to myself, but they say, if someone's in a particular situation, what should be going through their head? What are their possible options for dealing with this? What potential hazards could be in their way? And simple questions like that to create situations, and I'll usually have situations that I want to punctuate the drama, rather than just taking it I don't take a linear approach entirely. I kind of know I want to have these particular incidents, or I want a particular resolution to the story.
How has the industry itself changed? Have you noticed the big shifts in the focus that the industry itself has?
Well, I was working mainly in television before, doing some audio as well, and I'm not working in television at the moment. I'm working principally in audio, doing some prose as well. So I'm not back into the area of business that I knew best back then. What is clear is kind of the environment in which I was writing back then is different. I mean, in Doctor Who terms, I got the gig on Doctor Who, writing full circle, by sending scripts and storylines into successive script editors over a period of about 3 or 4 years, and getting feedback and having them mention me to each other as they handed over responsibility. And you can't do that now. You can't just send in a script and have it read, because it's a more litigious society now, and the fear that if a script is read and rejected and then an element of that or something very similar features in a story, then there could be legal action, which didn't really factor back in the early 80s. It just wasn't something that happened.
You mentioned the script editors there. It was Christopher H. Bidmead that worked on your... What was that process like? Did you have quite a good working relationship?
Yeah, it was very good. Yeah, I mean, I'd sent stuff in previously, Robert Holmes, Anthony Reid and Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams had me down, invited me down from Glasgow to London to talk about getting into writing generally, as opposed to writing specifically for Doctor Who. And then Chris took over as script editor at the beginning of 1980 and invited me down, and then just said, yeah, I'd written this storyline that became Full Circle. He liked it. He particularly liked the world I described, this world that changed every 40 years or so. And we had a long meeting, he and I and John Nathan Turner, talking about altering the storyline to fit in with the new companion of Adric, and how the story what differences that might make to the story, and how it would play out over 4 episodes. And then I went away, I wrote the first script, and then was commissioned for the remaining 3. I had a lot of communication with Chris, talked to Chris a lot, saw him when I came down to London, went to his house, and we got on really, really well. In fact, what was nice, I was very young then, but he didn't patronise me at all. In fact, he said to me at one point, he said, we were walking to the read-through in Acton, and he said, if I ever patronise you, pull me up about it. He was very clear about just wanting, although I was 17 and I became 18 during production, he really just saw me as a writer working on the show, and really saw past my age, really. I worked on at least one other thing, but that wasn't the case, and when I was writing a play for television, and during production, when the director found out I was 18 and not, as he thought, in my early 20s, he did start patronising me. He didn't buy me any more drinks. And so I did get patronised, but never with Chris. Chris is one of my most favourite people. I'll be eternally grateful to him and to John for the opportunity that they gave me back in 1980.
What's the next big thing coming from you? Is it from Big Finish, or what else are you working on outside of Big Finish?
The next thing coming out will be the second series of Unit, the new series Unit. There's a box set called Shutdown, which is coming out in June 2016. I've written 2 episodes for that, one set in Geneva, one set at the Tower of London, with Unit coming under siege, and an episode called The Battle of the Tower. I've written for the War Doctor, and the first one of those is coming up in September, in a story called The Eternity Cage, where we have the War Doctor, the Time Lords, the Daleks, and Centaurans. Yeah, at the moment of pinching myself, thinking there's John Hurt, speaking my lines, which is just fabulous. And a measure of the quality of Big Finish as well. The casts that we get are absolutely peerless, and they flatter the material every time. And there's another script I've done that I was in studio, Louise Jameson was performing this scene that left me with tears streaming down my face, and Nick Briggs went to pieces. They finished recording and he had his handkerchief up, just wiping tears away from his face. Because that's what the actors do. They surprise you by just taking what you've written and taking it to another level. I've written 2 episodes of series 5 of Survivors, which is coming out in November. That was great fun. We've got Niamh McIntosh as a principal guest star on that, playing a character called Carol Baker, who really goes through the mill. And we've got regulars from the TV series in the 70s back for that as well. Carolyn Seymour as Abby Grant, Ian McCulloch as Greg Preston, and Lucy Fleming as Jenny Richards.
Thanks very much for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.